nervous energy. Last week, I was not at the Sunday Masses. I was down at DeSales in Brooklyn with about a little over half of our senior class at Lumen Christi on a retreat with them. And as it was, because it was Sunday, and because it was a very specific Sunday for us Michiganders, we had to sort of change plans from the retreat that we had sort of initiated in the earlier stages because of, the reality of the Detroit Lions that were going to be playing in their first playoff game at home in 30 years. So we're like, well, we did not plan on this happening, but let's change the Sunday evening schedule so that we can watch the Detroit Lions. And so we just decided to go all in the middle of our retreat with our seniors to do a big watch party for the Detroit Lions. And, we made them wings and cookies and Hot Pockets. So we went through like 300 Hot Pockets and 6 pounds of wings before halftime. And they just eat so much food. You just forget how many calories that you're burning. And that's something that's kind of, maybe if you're at least a bandwagon Lions fan, or maybe you've been a diehard Lions fan, one of the things that you've noticed about them is the sort of the turnaround of the program that has been initiated in the last 3 years, under the leadership of Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes, and that the team they are today is not the team that they were that Dan Campbell inherited as a new coach 3 years ago. You might be able to call it a complete culture change for them, right? And that this is certainly something that underlies or sort of a foundation of like a redemption arc for the Lions, who we all hope will one day soon, right, make it to back to the Super Bowl and finally snap that longest streak in the NFL of not appearing in the Super Bowl. Now, what's interesting about something like that, right, which is obvious and part of our sort of cultural milieu today, and for us as Lions fans, something that we've been waiting our whole lives for since the days of my childhood. Last time we watched Barry Sanders, and it's evident to us what a change of culture makes possible that was at one time impossible. And culture changes happen and communities change because they see something different, right? Their vision changes. And you see these charismatic leaders, people like Dan Campbell, and for us Wolverines out there, Jim Harbaugh, and who in these public ways are able to show how you can go from here to greatness. And you have to bring people on board to that program. And the only way that we do that is by giving people a vision of where we're going. And if you show people a vision of where you're going, it's much easier for people to change whatever it is that they're currently doing in order to do the new thing to follow you. And this is the gospel program. The gospel program is about a change of vision. The change of vision is what allowed Jesus to call people to say, "Follow me." And whatever it was in that moment, when Jesus looked at each of them in the eye, here at the beginning of Mark's gospel, Peter and Andrew and James and John, and he says, I want you to follow me. And they saw something in that call that was a different vision of their life than the vision that they had and the vision that they were living, which was a good vision. Right? It's clear that they were successful fishermen. They had an enterprise with James and John's father, Zebedee, who was evidently well off enough even to hire servants, right, who were in his business with him. And so they left something for a different, more radical vision of life, something that they saw that sort of was able to raise them up, show them that there was something more that my heart can feed on, that my heart can be filled with, enough that I am willing to let go of what was behind me, the life that I was living, to do something new. It's the very story of the prophet Jonah, right? We heard in that first reading from the 3rd chapter. It's a very short book. The book of Jonah is 4 chapters. In the 3rd chapter, when Jonah is here, spewed out of the mouth of the whale, at the foot of the city of Nineveh, and the Ninevites were the enemies, as Father Chess said, they were the enemies of Israel, of the empire of Assyria. They were Gentiles. And Jonah is preaching to his enemies. Now, if you back up 2 chapters, you'll find that when God called Jonah and said, Jonah, I want you to preach to the Ninevites, Jonah said, absolutely not. And he went the wrong way. He did not have the vision. He did not have the vision. But what changed Jonah's vision was the intervention of God and God's designs upon his life. We may remember as that story continued, what changed Jonah's mind? What changed Jonah's vision? Well, he was swallowed by a whale for 3 days. You want to know what we call that? A miracle. Utterly impossible. You're not going to survive trying to float out into the water, right? He tried to take a ship with some boaters out to, I don't know if it was Tarshish or wherever it was, and the boat gets caught in this storm, and all the people on the boat are like, why are we sinking? And they find out that Jonah was running from the Lord, and they're like, what are we supposed to do with you? And he says, throw me overboard. So he was thrown overboard to save the ship, to quell the storm, and then was swallowed by the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. You're not going to live on the sea as a human being for 3 days and 3 nights trying to float. You're also not going to live in the belly of a whale except by a sheer miracle. Now, Jonah underwent an entire change of life because in his very uncomfortable miracle, he somehow was provided sustenance and oxygen for 3 days inside of a whale. Don't ask me how that works because I don't know. It's a miracle. Jonah's life was being saved by a miracle. And when his life was saved by a miracle, he was so thoroughly converted in his vision for his life that when he shows up on Nineveh and God says for the second time, Jonah, I want you to preach to the Ninevites, he says, fine, I'll do it. And he does it. And it takes him 1 day out of 3 in order to be successful in his mission, which we find out at the end of chapter 3 he's not very happy about, but that's another part of the story. Jonah's life was changed. Jonah gained courage to live a life that he was unable to choose because his vision changed. And this is such a great lesson for us when we listen to the stories of so many of the prophets, and certainly when we listen to the ministry of Jesus and the life of the people that he called. Fishermen, nobodies, people just like you and me, uneducated, unpopular, not leaders, not people with all kinds of wealth and fame and status, regular Joes and Janes, just like you and me. And how did he get them to change their minds? How did God get the prophets for regular people to do impossible, extraordinary things? He knew that in order for them to live a different life, in order for you and I to live a different life, is going to require courage. Because your life of faith and my life of faith is upstream. It's not downstream. We know this by experience, that we walk against the grain, that we swim against the current, that we face obstacles in order to be, as it were, faithful, successful, you might call it in modern parlance, Christians, true, real, living, breathing, faithful followers of Jesus in the Catholic faith. We can't do that without courage. But courage accompanies vision. You know, we always, every day, every year, so often, when I do my examinations of conscience, and inevitably I say to myself, I want to be better. I want to be different. I want to be holier. I want to be more faithful. Those are good and holy desires that God gives to me all the time. And part of the reason he gives me those recognitions is because he shows me, here's the things that didn't go quite right. It's like every day. I never like bat 1,000 any day, And instead of being discouraged about that, I simply ask myself why God lets me see my own failings and why God shows me a desire to be, as it were, holier, better, more faithful, a greater witness. God gives us these things to remind us of what we need more of. What I need more of always is courage. Because without courage, I'm just going to be comfortable. And it's much nicer. I love being comfortable. So do you. We all love it. But our lives were not made to be comfortable. God did not create us for that. God created each of us for greatness. But in order to be great, we have to see that vision. And we're going to see that vision. And courage is going to accompany that vision so that we can change, so that we can turn from wherever it is that we are in life to be the men and women that God has destined for each of us, even to preach to the enemies of our day. We are not popular as Christians. We're not. This is, for example, Sanctity of Life Sunday, which happens on the 22nd of, I think the official day is the 22nd of January, where we have the special Mass. Right? This is a perfect example in our day of where we feel perhaps a little bit like Jonah, where we feel a little bit like, how is Andrew and Peter and James and John being called to something more than the life that was simply inside of their own orbit? We have to be courageous, even in things like the Cause for Life. This was something really incredible that Father Chaz and I just looked at today. There was an interview that was given by a sports commentator named Johnny Root, who was at the March for Life in D.C. Just yesterday. And Jim Harbaugh was there as a public witness for the Cause of Life. And he interviewed Jim Harbaugh and asked him about his life, of course, asked him about the national championship and the NFL, but also about his witness for the unborn. Not a popular cause in our day. And Jim Harbaugh talked about the inspiration of his own players and of his wife and of his family, and the example of so many that give him the courage to be a public witness for the sake of the unborn and the most vulnerable. He said, no other rights matter if you don't have the right to be born. And in so many words, his life proclaimed that I can't be who I am if I'm not willing to be uncomfortable sometimes, with the kind of vision that gives me something different. A vision that St. Paul talked about in the second reading that says, if you have the vision of the eternal in your eyes, all the things, all the temporal realities of life are put in their place. And we begin to live our marriages differently. We begin to live our economics differently. We begin to live our joys and our sadnesses differently, because courage accompanies our vision and allows us to be risen up to what we were truly made to be. We do this with our Lumen Christi students in November now, beginning this year. We're doing the Michigan March for Life, and we took our high school students on November 8th to the Capitol for that very purpose, to be witnesses for the cause of life. Because it's comfortable? Absolutely not. But because we have to teach our sons and daughters what it means to be brave and courageous, even sometimes when it's not popular, to be ever reminded that a true Christian life of faith is an upstream swim, not a downstream float. And so, in order for us to do that, Jesus asks us to pray for vision. Because when we have the vision of God firmly in our hearts and in our minds, it gives us the courage we need to live the life that we were made for. A life of great witness, not only in the here and now, but a life that will lead us to the glory that we have been destined for in eternity.